Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel, and as you can tell from the title of this video and from that opening sequence, we're going to be talking about how to do a driving sequence on a budget. And by a budget, I mean about $100 or so. That's all it takes. So before we even dive into that, let's talk about safety. Remember, you are operating a motor vehicle, so please be safe. Follow the rules of the road, drive on roads with little to no traffic at all. And if you're going to review your footage or, mess around with any kind of camera settings, please pull over to a safe spot. I can't encourage safety enough. Remember, safety first. The lives of you and the lives of others are more valuable than the life of your camera. So, all right, now we got that out of the way, let's dive into it. Let's talk about how to do a driving scene on a budget. All right, so you're probably wondering what my setup was for that opening sequence, and it's super easy, super minimalistic. It requires three pieces of equipment. It requires your camera, and it requires a tripod, specifically a photo tripod, primarily because it's more affordable, it's more common, but also because it's just super flexible in a compact space. It's also just a smaller profile in general than comparison to a fluid head video tripod. And the last thing is sandbags, something to weigh down the tripod to make sure your camera doesn't go flying if you're taking turns. So I'll give you a little sneak peek at my setup right here. This is just a little mock one that I did, but this is pretty much the same setup I had when I was filming the driving sequence. So you have the tripod right there, you have one leg pressed up against the passenger seat that's weighed down by a sandbag. You have another sandbag at the bottom, and that is up against the door, so that secures it. And then I didn't have a third sandbag, but I used my roadside kit to press the third leg up against the wall in between the passenger and the driver's seat. But if you look at this, it's very stable. It doesn't really move if I shake it too much. If you take a turn really fast, then your camera might go flying. But overall, it's a really secure rig for the most part, especially if you're just kind of driving on a straight ahead. But yeah, it's super easy. It worked perfectly for the opening sequence, and you can use it pretty much at any spot in the car between the front seat, back seat, and the trunk if you have a trunk that connects to the cabin. We're going to talk more about that when it comes to camera angles. Before we even set up this rig, we should talk about the planning process. There's a lot of planning that goes into a driving sequence, and that's going to influence, the technical side later on. But yeah, let's first talk about planning. All right, so we're back in the car, and now we can talk about the planning process. And when you're planning a driving sequence, or really any scene in general, you need to ask yourself 4 questions. The first question being, who's in the scene? So how many actors are you working with, or how many characters? The other is, where are they in the setting or in the scene? And this can help you figure out exactly where you need to place your camera in order to kind of cover everyone there. The other question is, what's happening in the scene? What actions are you covering? Is it dialogue? Are there specific actions you need to highlight that are going to be important later? This can help kind of formulate a general shot list for you during that sequence. But the last question is really important, and that is, how should your audience be feeling when watching the scene unfold on screen? Film is a language, and the way that we tell this language is through how we frame the camera. And a car is a great way to bring across certain tones or emotions. It's a very confined space, and you can use that to build suspense or tension, but you can also use it to bring up a sense of intimacy or connection between multiple characters or one character specifically. So for that opening sequence, I knew I wanted to go for something a little bit more tense, but also very intimate. You're trying to get to know this character a little bit more, so you start wider and then you focus in a little bit more on what he is, expressing in his face. Is he thinking about something? Does he feel regretful, or is he's scared of what's ahead on the road ahead? That's what I was thinking of. That was the intention behind that scene. So you really have to kind of think about that when you're planning out this and what you're trying to get across, because that's going to really help you with your camera angles and the types of lenses that you're going to pick. Which, speaking of, let's talk about what lenses work best in a driving sequence. All right, so this is not a shot that I would recommend at all. You don't want to block your view. Remember, safety first. But when it comes to picking lenses for a driving sequence, I have a specific range of focal lengths that I think works the best for such a compact space. And that range is 24 millimeters to 70 millimeters. So if you have a 24 to 70 lens, you're perfect. If you're shooting on prime lenses, so yeah, if you're shooting a 24 millimeter, 35 millimeter, 50 millimeter, those all work perfectly. 85 might be a little tight, but hey, give it a try, test it out. I love to see the results. But Let's kind of break it down. So at the widest, 24 millimeters, I think this is a perfect focal length if you're trying to highlight specifically the body performance of an actor. So if you're doing something that, you want to highlight more of the motion of the actor in the scene, turning the steering wheel, all of that, that's great. Also, if you want to share the scene between multiple subjects, so, highlighting someone in the back seat while still having your driver present as well, I think it's wide enough to do that. You may be able to extend it out to something like a 20 millimeter. I would worry about the distortion of the edges in that case, making the car look a little wonky and weird, but you're welcome to give it a try. But I think 24 is that perfect wider focal length for a scene like this. Once you get to 35 millimeters, this is also great for still highlighting a little bit of that body performance from the actor, but you're still focusing in on one particular subject. I think it's great for dialogue sequences. I actually think this is probably the most versatile focal length for an entire car sequence if you only had one lens to pick. Then you get to 50 millimeters, and this is where things get a little bit more intimate. You are really focusing on one specific character or actor in the scene, and you're starting to read a little bit more into the facial performance of the actor rather than just the body. So that's what I did for the opening sequence. I specifically used a 50 millimeter for any of the closer up shots of my face. And then you have 70 millimeters, and this is where you're really narrowing in on the actor's face. You're trying to read more of that subtle facial performance that may tell you a little bit more about what the character might be thinking. So those are kind of the focal lengths I would recommend. Again, you could disagree with me. You can try out different focal lengths for yourself and see if things look different or better. They fit certain circumstances that maybe I didn't even try in my sequence. Again, this is all about experimentation. I could always be proven wrong. But that's my suggestion on lens choices and focal lengths. 24 to 70, ideal. And if you have prime lenses, 24 millimeters, 35 millimeters, 50 millimeters, perfect. Again, I think 35 is probably the most ideal. But now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about camera angles and how many camera angles you can get within such a compact space. All right, so camera angles. This is the last subject of the video, and you'd be surprised at the variety of shots you can get just within one car. To start out, you can do exterior shots outside of the windows, giving the perspective of different passengers, or even the perspective of the driver, if you do a shot similar to what I did in the opening scene of the road ahead in a way. But also these shots can be used to set the context of the world around the car, kind of giving us an idea of where these characters are going or where they're coming from or environments that they're passing through. You can also do detailed shots with some more telephoto type lenses like a 50 or a 70 that isolate specific actions that may be important for the story later on, or again set the context of what the character is doing in the car. And then you have character focus shots. And the way I like to break down character focus shots is by the different spaces in the car. So you have the front seat, specifically the passenger seat, the back seats, and then the trunk. The trunk, I love this particular shot in the trunk where you can kind of establish who is in the car, especially with shooting at a 24 millimeter or a 35 millimeter. You can get a shot like this and you can establish who is filling the space. So in this shot, it's just me, but you can also see if there would be someone in the passenger seat or someone in the back seats as well, they can all fill that space. And again, you're establishing, again, all the characters in that car ahead of time. So I really enjoy that shot. I think it's really useful if you have trunk space that connects to the main cabin of your car. In the back seat, this is a great opportunity to try out dialogue. So you can pretty much have your camera at a diagonal from the subject that you're focusing on. So if I'm in the driver's seat, you have the camera behind the passenger seat pointing over my shoulder. You can get a shot like this. And so this is a great opportunity to maybe try some dialogue between characters. You can do the inverse from behind the driver's seat to the passenger. You can also use this as the perspective of maybe someone in the back seat. And then from that perspective, you can also kind of figure out how you want to angle your camera by height. And so if you're focusing on, let's say, the driver, if you angle the camera downwards towards your character, they're going to look a little bit more vulnerable. But if you lower the camera, then aim it upwards, then your character is going to seem like they have more authority within the scene, like they have control. And that's just some of the general kind of camera psychology you can apply to your shots like that. Now in the front seat, this is a really great time for you to focus on the driver specifically, very much like that opening scene. I had a wider shot at 35 millimeters, which sets the context of who the character is and what they're doing in this scene. Of course, they're driving. But then as you move forward, you have those tighter shots. You're able to kind of isolate specifically on that character and kind of get into their head. You have that intimate moment where you're trying to read their facial features and maybe understand what they're thinking or what they're going through. So that's a great opportunity. It can also be from the perspective of the passenger in the passenger seat. So again, really nice spot. There's so many different areas in the car that you can utilize for all these different shots. I'm sure there's ones that I didn't even try out yet. So again, try and experiment, try and have some fun. And if you do film a driving sequence, please send it my way. And again, I have to highlight this. Please be safe when you're doing driving sequences. Follow the rules of the road. Keep an eye out for everyone. Focus on your driving rather than your camera. But yeah, that's it, guys. That's the video about doing a driving sequence on a budget. I hope you had a great time, and hopefully I'll be doing some more videos specifically on maybe some lighting breakdowns in the future. But yeah, until then, keep creating, keep having fun. I'll see you all soon.